The year is 1776, a date etched into the collective consciousness of the world as the birth of a dream. Yet for many standing on the red clay of Virginia or the cobblestones of Boston, it was the beginning of a profound and enduring contradiction. You've been told the story of the brave patriots who stood up to the tyranny of King George III, fueled by a desire for liberty that burned brighter than the British lanterns. But the history books often gloss over the gritty reality of the beefing that actually started it all. America wasn't born from a polite suggestion. It was born from a violent retaliation against taxation without representation, a financial dispute that escalated into a global showdown. As the redcoats marched with rhythmic precision, the atmosphere in the colonies was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the whispers of revolution. Thomas Jefferson sat in a humid room in Philadelphia, dipping his quill into ink to write the words "all men are created equal," a phrase that would become the heartbeat of a new nation. But as those words dried on the parchment of the Declaration of Independence, the irony was deafening. The very men debating the nature of freedom were the same men who held the keys to the shackles of thousands. The Constitution promised a sanctuary for the free and the brave, a lighthouse of democracy in a world of monarchs. But this promised land was an exclusive club. If you were a homie stuck on a plantation, working from sunrise to sunset under the scorching sun of the South, those ink strokes on the Constitution didn't apply to you. You were the engine of the economy, but a ghost in the legal system. The late 1700s weren't just about tea parties and tricorn hats. They were about the construction of a magnificent house, where the front door was locked to the very people who helped build the foundation. We call it the land of the free, but history shows us that in 1776, freedom was a luxury item, accessible only to those with the right skin color and the right amount of property. The rebellion against Britain was a masterpiece of political strategy, a daring gamble for sovereignty that changed the course of human history. But it also cemented a racial and social hierarchy that would take centuries and oceans of blood to even begin to dismantle. When we look at the flags and the fireworks, we must also look at the silhouettes in the background, the indigenous tribes seeing their lands reclassified as frontier, and the enslaved families seeing their bondage codified by the laws of a free nation. This is the hidden drama of the American origin story, a high-stakes heist of liberty carried out by men who were masters and revolutionaries at the exact same time. It's a story of genius and hypocrisy, of grand visions and narrow sight. To understand the America of today, you have to look past the oil paintings and see the raw, unfiltered struggle of a nation trying to define freedom, while the cries from the plantations echoed through the halls of power. The revolution didn't end the struggle for liberty. It merely set the stage for a much longer, much more dangerous fight for the soul of the country. America's gangster roots are right there in the defiance of 1776. A bold claim to power that ignored the very principles it claimed to uphold for everyone who didn't fit the profile of the founding elite. As the mid-19th century approached, the fragile compromise that held the North and South together began to splinter under the weight of an irreconcilable moral and economic divide. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and that spark was the brutal reality of human bondage. You've been told the Civil War was a noble crusade to end slavery, and while that eventually became its guiding star, the reality was a gritty, visceral struggle for the very survival of the Union. When the first shots rang out at Fort Sumter, the nation plummeted into a darkness that no one could have predicted. This was a turning point that helped free the slaves, but the bill for that freedom was written in the names of over 600,000 soldiers who ended up in the grave. Imagine the sheer magnitude of that loss. Entire generations of young men wiped out on the sun-drenched fields of Gettysburg and the bloody thickets of Shiloh. The ground itself seemed to groan under the weight of the carnage. Who could truly fathom the amount of blood it took to conquer the institution of slavery? It was a debt paid in limbs, in shattered families, and in the charred remains of cities like Atlanta and Richmond. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 changed the game, turning a war for territory into a war for the soul of humanity. But for the millions of Black Americans, freedom wasn't a gift handed down from a marble pedestal. It was something they had to demand and fight for on the front lines, proving their citizenship with every drop of blood spilled in uniform. The war ended the legal chains, but it birthed a new kind of struggle, the Reconstruction era, where the promises of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were met with a fierce, violent backlash. This is the part they don't always emphasize in the classroom, that freedom in America has never been free. It has always been a transaction, often requiring the ultimate sacrifice to move the needle of progress even an inch. The cost of the Civil War left a permanent scar on the American psyche, a reminder that the unity of the United States was forged in a furnace of unprecedented violence. We talk about the 600,000 deaths as a statistic, but each one represents a life cut short in the service of a nation trying to decide if it would actually live up to its founding creed. The war proved that America was gangsta enough to tear itself apart to settle its deepest contradictions. Yet the ghosts of that conflict still haunt our politics today. Every time we debate states' rights versus federal power, or grapple with the enduring legacy of racial inequality, we are hearing the echoes of the cannons from 1861. The freedom gained was hard-won and fragile, a testament to the fact that in this country, nothing changes without a fight that leaves a mark on the land and its people forever. This blood debt is the foundation upon which the modern American empire was built, a heavy price for a promise that we are still trying to fully realize in the streets and the halls of justice today. As the dust of the 19th century settled, a new kind of power began to consolidate in the shadows of Wall Street, far from the chaotic battlefields of the Civil War, but no less influential on the destiny of every American citizen. By the early 1900s, the nation's financial system was a wild frontier of boom-on-bust cycles. But in a secretive movement began to reshape the very definition of American sovereignty. You've been taught that the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the economy and prevent depressions. But the hidden drama suggests a much more calculated takeover by an elite class of bankers, who sought to serve their own interests above all else. This wasn't just about managing money. It was about who controlled the juice of the entire nation. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was pushed through, fundamentally altering the relationship between the government and the people's wealth. If you tried to stop the Federal Reserve back then, you were essentially fighting a ghost, a decentralized yet all-powerful entity that held the keys to the kingdom. Critics of the era whispered that the bankers didn't just break the Great Depression, they may have profited from the very volatility they claimed to cure. They were buying lies and burning truths to ensure that the house always won. This is the era where the gangsta nature of American finance truly took root, moving from the overt violence of the frontier to the quiet, systematic extraction of wealth through debt and interest. While the average worker was grinding away, the architects of this new system were playing a high-stakes game where the rules were written in wood-paneled boardrooms in Jekyll Island. The question that remains in the shadows of our history is, who did they really serve? Was it the farmer in Nebraska struggling with a mortgage, or the international financiers looking to expand their global reach? Through the 1920s, while the surface was polished with jazz and gold, the trap was being set. The Federal Reserve gained the power to expand and contract the money supply at will, a tool of such immense power that it effectively made the politicians in Washington beholden to the masters of the vault. This isn't just old news. It's the blueprint for the modern world where more money, more power, is the only law that truly sticks. Understanding the birth of the Fed is crucial because it explains why, even today, the economy feels like a rigged game to so many a system, where freedom is constantly under pressure from the very institutions designed to protect it. It's the ultimate hidden drama, a silent revolution that happened without a single shot fired, yet it conquered the nation more effectively than any foreign army ever could. The 1920s are often painted in the vibrant hues of the Jazz Age, a decade of flappers, forbidden gin, and a stock market that seemed to defy gravity. But beneath this glittering veneer lay a fractured reality of selective progress and deep-seated exclusion. While the history books celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 as the moment women finally won the right to vote, the hidden drama reveals that for many, the ballot box remained a locked door. It's a bitter truth often omitted in standard curricula. Women could vote unless they were black. In the Jim Crow South, the triumph of the suffragettes didn't dismantle the poll taxes, literacy tests, or the sheer physical intimidation that kept black women and men in the shadows of the democratic process. I wonder what the architects of this era had to gain from keeping so many in the back of the line. The answer is as simple as it is cold: more money and more power. While the cities roared with prosperity, the rural heartlands and marginalized communities were stuck in a trap, witnessing a massive concentration of wealth that only served the elite. This was an era of gangsta capitalism where the industrial titans and financial wizards built an empire of consumption, while systematically ignoring the cries for genuine civil rights. The Roaring Twenties were a masterclass in the art of the distraction. As long as the music played loud enough and the stock prices climbed high enough, no one wanted to look at the structural decay underneath. We celebrate the new woman of the 20s, but we must also remember the washerwomen and domestic workers, who were legally barred from the protections and privileges the decade supposedly offered. This period wasn't just about the Great Gatsby. It was about the hardening of the lines between the haves and the have-nots, a divide that would eventually lead the nation toward its greatest economic collapse. The illusion of universal progress was a lie sold to maintain the status quo, a recurring theme in the American narrative where the promise of freedom is often used as a cloak for the expansion of control. To understand the 1920s is to see the birth of the modern consumer culture, a world where identity is bought rather than born, but it is also to see the strategic exclusion that ensured the juice of the nation remained in the hands of a few, while the many were told to just keep dancing until the music stopped. Beneath the golden glow of the Roaring Twenties, a darker and more predatory force was manifesting in the American heartland, proving that the nation's gangsta streak wasn't just limited to the boardrooms of Wall Street, but extended into the very fabric of social order. While the city celebrated a new era of modernity, a shadow empire was being rebuilt in the form of the Second Ku Klux Klan. This wasn't just a small group of outliers. hiding in the woods? By the mid-1920s, the KKK had exploded into a mainstream political juggernaut with an estimated membership of 3 to 5 million men. They didn't just hide behind white hoods in the dark. They marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., with their faces uncovered. A million-strong display of power that signaled a terrifying reality. The resistance to equality was organized, funded, and socially acceptable. You've been told that the post-Civil War era was a slow crawl toward progress. But the truth is that every time the marginalized tried to fight back for their dignity, they were met with a calculated, violent counterattack. The hidden drama here is how deeply this shadow empire infiltrated the American establishment, with governors, senators, and local sheriffs counting themselves as members of the invisible empire. It was a period where the two voices of the nation, the promise of liberty and the reality of white supremacy, clashed with a lethal intensity. Often it only took one bullet or one noose to try and take that dignity back, silencing those who dared to believe that the land of the free actually belonged to them. This era forwarded a chilling truth that isn't always highlighted in textbooks: that the democratic process itself was being used to enforce a racial caste system through intimidation and systemic terror. The KKK of the 1920s marketed itself as a fraternal organization dedicated to Americanism, a clever branding move that allowed them to recruit from the pulpit to the police station. This wasn't an accident. It was a strategic effort to maintain the status quo and ensure that the juice of economic and political opportunity remained strictly segregated. When we look at the footage of those massive rallies today, we see more than just a hate group. We see a significant portion of the American population actively fighting to keep the country's gangsta hierarchy intact. It serves as a stark reminder that the progress made during the Civil War was fragile and could be easily rolled back by those who viewed equality as a threat to their own dominance. To understand the America of the mid-20th century, one must acknowledge this period of open, state-sanctioned hostility, where the struggle for a single dignity was a life-or-death gamble against a million men in robes, who believed they were the true guardians of the American dream. The shadow empire may have eventually receded from the headlines, but the structures of exclusion it reinforced would take decades more of blood and fire to even begin to dismantle. As the 1940s dawned, the American gangsta spirit shifted its focus from internal consolidation to global dominance, marking a period where the nation's industrial might was weaponized to reshape the world order. While the standard narrative focuses on the heroic liberation of Europe, the hidden drama explores the cold, calculated decisions made in the pursuit of becoming an undisputed superpower. Europe was indeed broken in half, a continent reduced to rubble by the machinery of total war. But as the conflict neared its end, the United States made a move that would haunt the human conscience forever. The decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki wasn't just about ending the war. It was a high-stakes demonstration of special interests designed to ensure that the rest of the world, including the Soviet Union, knew exactly who held the ultimate juice. We are told the Japanese were left stressed by the bounty dropped, but the reality was a catastrophic display of power that forced an entire empire to bow down. This was the moment the United States transitioned from a continental power to a global hegemon, establishing a military-industrial complex that would dominate the next 80 years of history. Behind the scenes, the architects of this new world order were busy creating the Bretton Woods system and the United Nations, ensuring that American financial and political influence would be baked into the very foundation of the post-war era. This wasn't just about peace. It was about the strategic positioning of American interests in every corner of the map. The gangster reality of World War II was that while American soldiers were fighting for freedom on the ground, the planners in Washington were drawing lines on maps that would dictate the flow of oil, gold, and influence for generations. Over 80 years later, we are still running within the tracks laid down during this period, living in a world where the threat of overwhelming force remains the silent partner in every diplomatic negotiation. The price of this global hegemony was astronomical, not just in terms of the lives lost in the Pacific and Atlantic theaters, but in the moral weight of being the first and only nation to use nuclear weapons in combat. This era proved that America was willing to play the most dangerous game on the biggest stage possible, securing its place at the head of the table through a combination of undeniable bravery and ruthless pragmatism. To understand the modern geopolitical landscape, one must see World War II not just as a victory of good over evil, but as the moment the American special interest became the primary driver of global events, a legacy that continues to define our foreign policy and our role as the world's policeman today. As the dust of the mid-20th century settled, a new and more subtle form of power began to solidify within the corridors of Washington, D.C., creating a landscape where the lines between public service and private gain became increasingly blurred. This was the era where the gangsta nature of American influence evolved into a sophisticated system of special interests that would dictate the nation's trajectory for over 80 years. You've been told that democracy is a system of one person, one vote. But the hidden drama reveals a reality where the juice is often directed by those who can afford to buy the ear of a politician. This isn't just about simple bribery. It's about a deeply entrenched establishment where lobbying firms, massive corporations, and high-stakes financiers have created a revolving door between the halls of government and the boardrooms of the elite. The Kutchbun GCC highlights a cynical truth that we are still running within a system where politicians are essentially being bought and sold like commodities. These special interests have mastered the art of the long game, ensuring that regardless of which party holds the White House, the fundamental machinery of the military-industrial complex and the global financial web remains untouched. It's a world where policy is often written by the very industries it is meant to regulate, a strategic maneuver that ensures the House always wins while the average citizen is left wondering why the promises of the campaign trail never quite materialize. This untouchable establishment has overseen decades of shifting wealth and power, often prioritizing global market stability or defense contracts over the immediate needs of the domestic population. The drama lies in the quiet persistence of these structures, how they survived the scandals of the 70s, the deregulation of the 80s, and the tech booms of the 90s, only to emerge stronger and more integrated than ever. We see the symptoms today in the staggering cost of elections and the influence of dark money. But the roots go back to that post-World War II era where America decided it would be the world's chief architect. This isn't just a political critique, it's an observation of a historical shift where the gangsta bravado of the past was replaced by the polished, legalistic maneuvering of the present. To understand the current political climate, one must recognize that the struggle isn't just between two parties, but between the people and an establishment that has spent 80 years making itself indispensable and, in many ways, unaccountable to the very public it claims to serve. The hidden history of modern America is the story of how power became so concentrated and so shielded that it feels almost impossible to move, a testament to the fact that when enough money is involved, the land of the free can start to feel like a very exclusive, very expensive club. The date November 22, 1963, stands as a jagged scar across the timeline of the American century, representing the moment the hidden drama of the establishment collided violently with the highest office in the land. John F. Kennedy wasn't just a president, he was a symbol of a shifting tide, a man who increasingly found himself at odds with the very gangsta elements that had come to define the shadow government. You've been told the official story of a lone gunman in a book depository, but the historical narrative favored by those who look deeper suggests a much darker conspiracy. Rooted in JFK's mission to challenge the status quo, Kennedy didn't like the way special interests in the military-industrial complex were buying all the politicians, and he was beginning to take steps that threatened the flow of power to the untouchable elite. He had reportedly spoken of splintering the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and was skeptical of the escalating involvement in foreign conflicts that lined the pockets of defense contractors. On that sun-drenched afternoon in Dallas, the juice fought back. When those shots rang out at Dealey Plaza, they didn't just kill a man. They packed his number and sent a chilling message to anyone who dared to disrupt the established order. The tragedy at Dealey Plaza marked a definitive end to an era of perceived innocence and birthed a cynical age of suspicion that still dominates our politics today. Look at our politics now. The deep distrust of government institutions and the rise of fellows with suspicious ways can be traced back to the unanswered questions of 1963. The Warren Commission attempted to close the book, but the hidden history remains an open wound, fueled by the realization that when a leader becomes a threat to the special interests that have run the country for 80 years, the consequences are lethal. This wasn't just a murder. It was a coup in broad daylight, a demonstration that the real power in America doesn't always reside in the Oval Office. Kennedy's death ensured that the trajectory of the Cold War and the expansion of the gangsta state would continue unabated, leaving a legacy of what-ifs that haunt the American psyche. To understand the modern era of transparency and whistleblowers, one must understand the silence that followed. The shots in Dallas, silence, enforced by an establishment that proved it was willing to put down even the most powerful man in the world to protect its grip on the nation's destiny. It remains the ultimate cautionary tale in the American drama. The moment the dream of a new frontier was buried 60 feet deep, leaving us with a political landscape where the strings are pulled from the shadows, and the truth is often the first casualty of special interest. Preservation. The morning of September 11, 2001, serves as the most jarring pivot point in modern memory, a day that redirected the entire energy of the American gangsta state toward a new, nebulous enemy. While the world watched in horror as the towers fell, the hidden drama began to unfold in the high-security bunkers and boardrooms where the response was being crafted. You've been told the story of a singular mastermind named Bin Laden, but the Kutchbun GCC reflects a deep-seated suspicion that has lingered for decades. The idea that the events were used to kickstart a black start for a perpetual war machine. This wasn't just a reaction to a tragedy. It was the launch of the global war on terror, a conflict with no clear boundaries, no defined end date, and no specific territory. As the dust settled over Ground Zero, a new era of suspicious ways emerged. where civil liberties were traded for the illusion of security through the Patriot Act. The drama lies in the staggering financial reality of the aftermath, as certain as the sun rises. More war means the more certain people get paid. We must ask, who truly benefited from the trillions of dollars funneled into private military contractors, surveillance technology, and regional It was a period where the special interests that JFK had supposedly feared became more entrenched than ever, using the atmosphere of fear to justify an unprecedented expansion of the military-industrial complex. The Kuchbun GCC suggests that while the official narrative pointed toward a specific villain, the machinery of the state was already moving to secure oil interests and geopolitical leverage in the Middle East. This era proved that America's gangsta nature could adapt to the 21st century by creating a state of permanent emergency, ensuring that the juice of government spending would flow endlessly into the pockets of the untouchable establishment. 9/11's changed the soul of the country, shifting the focus from domestic prosperity to a paranoid global vigilance that continues to drain the national treasury and divide the populace. To understand the America of the last 25 years, one must look at the war on terror not just as a security measure, but as a massive economic engine fueled by chaos's system, where the cost is paid by the soldiers on the ground and the taxpayers at home, while the profits are harvested by those who remain hidden in the shadows of the defense budget. This is the uncomfortable reality of the modern American empire, a structure that requires an enemy to maintain its momentum, proving that in the game of high-stakes politics, tragedy is often the most lucrative opportunity of all. To understand the final chapter of this narrative is to realize that the American dream has always existed in a state of tension between a beautiful promise and a cold, gangster reality. We are told we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, but the journey from 1776 to the 21st century reveals a nation that has consistently operated with a ruthless pragmatism to secure its interests. From the plantations of the South to the high-frequency trading floors of modern Wall Street, the underlying hustle for more money, more power has remained a constant driving force. The Kuchbun GCC challenges us to see America as the most gangsta entity on the world stage, a title earned not just through military might, but through the creation of a global system that makes the world's politicians and economies bow down to its special interests. This isn't a story of failure, but a story of a complex, high-stakes game where the rules are often written by those who hold the juice. The hidden drama of our modern era is the realization that the struggles of the past for racial dignity, for financial sovereignty, and for political transparency are not over. They have simply evolved into new forms. Looking at our politics now, we see the echoes of JFK, the shadow of the Federal Reserve, and the persistent influence of a military-industrial complex that gets paid regardless of who sits in the Oval Office. The cost of this empire is high, often measured in the erosion of the very freedoms the nation was founded to protect. Yet it remains the most powerful force in human history. As we move further into the 21st century, the question isn't whether America is free, but whether we are brave enough to confront the gangsta structures that have defined our history for over 200 years. We the people must navigate a world where the lines between hero and villain are often blurred by the pursuit of national interest. This is the ultimate lesson of the hidden American history, that freedom is never a static gift, but a volatile asset that must be reclaimed from the special interests that seek to monopolize it. To live in the America of today is to be part of a continuous, visceral drama nation that is as much a product of its backroom deals as it is its battlefield victories. It is a land of profound contradictions, where the highest ideals of humanity walk hand in hand with the most calculated maneuvers of power. Understanding this reality doesn't diminish the American story. It makes it real. It demands that we look past the orange glow of the sunset and see the machinery operating in the dark, reminding us that in this nation, nothing is truly free, and the struggle for the soul of the country is the most gangsta game of all.